Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Our Corinne True Baha'i Center History Book Club has almost 200 members from many countries, several of whom have joined just in the last few days to be able to join our conversation today with Rob Weinberg, and we're very excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're so excited to talk about your book, Rob, about Lady Blomfield, her life and times, which we've been reading this month and really enjoying. So let's start with the prayer for protection, which is at the bottom of page 379 of the book. Julie Redson Smith has kindly agreed to read that for us.
O Lord my God, assist thy loved ones to be firm in thy faith, to walk in thy ways, to be steadfast in thy cause. Give them thy grace to withstand the onslaught of self and passion, to follow the light of divine guidance. Thou art the powerful, the gracious, the self-subsisting, the bestower, the compassionate, the almighty, the all-bountiful. Kisu, you are muted.
That's what I realized. Thank you. So before we get started, I wanted to read from the letter that I shared with you earlier, from Abdul Baha to Lady Blomfield on the 4th of January, 1912. And Abdul Baha writes, "It behooveth thee to render 1,000 thanks at every moment for the bounty of being thus crowned with the diadem of the most great guidance. And it befitteth thee to pride thyself above all the queens of the world. For thousands of worldly queens shall come and go, leaving behind neither name nor trace, neither sign nor fruit. But through the light of God's love thou wilt shine forth above the horizon of eternity, and thy remembrance will bring solace to the hearts of men and women in ages and centuries to come." And I think, this is why we're all so excited and so happy to have been reading this book that Rob has so beautifully prepared for us, because her remembrance will bring solace to our hearts. And it has definitely done that. So let me start first by introducing Robert Weinberg. Rob has had an incredibly busy weekend this weekend, and I'm just so grateful that he's been willing to be flexible and to join us late in the evening in London. So thank you so much. Rob, in his Baha'i service, is a member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United Kingdom. He's the author of several Baha'i books. He's the host of the George Ronald GR Books podcast series, which I know many of us listen to, and has worked for the Universal House of Justice in various capacities. In his professional life, he's a producer of radio programs for the BBC and Classic FM in the UK, and of the very popular history podcast, Not Just the Tudors and Gone Medieval. He is just such an interesting and brilliant man that I think we could have many sessions with him for many reasons, and we would enjoy that. Let me also introduce Robert Stockman, my dear friend. He is the director of the Corinne True Baha'i Center. All the work of the book club is carried out under his loving guidance and his support and counsel. I have known Rob for many, many years, ever since he was studying for his doctorate in theology from Harvard Divinity School. He has published 7 books on the Baha'i faith, so we're going to have a great conversation today. Rob, we'll start with questions. I don't know which Rob to call on, but Rob Weinberg will start with questions about your background and motivation for writing about Lady Blomfield. Then we'll talk about the highlights of her life and how we should think about her life in order to motivate us to better serve the 9-year plan. And then we'll open it up for questions. So let me turn it over to Robert Stockman.
Right. And I changed my name to Robert from Rob so as to reduce the confusion a bit.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So we can try using that form of signaling instead. It's really delighted I'm delighted to be able to participate in this and to have read your book, Rob. And I really enjoyed, I think the first time I met you was 2010 when I was on pilgrimage and you were there at the World Center still. So it's been nice to renew my acquaintance with you on various occasions since, and I've really appreciated the contact as well. I really was very impressed by the research you did, the thoroughness and everything. And I guess I get to start with some of the very sort of simple, basic questions. How did you become a Baha'i author? Tell us about yourself and your background.
Thank you, first of all, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to revisit this book, which came out 12 years ago. And I should say it took about 12 or 13 years of work and gathering the research. So, yeah, when you asked me, I thought I better read it again because, a lot of time's gone by and there's a lot of it, a lot of things in it that, not that I'd forgotten, but, it was nice to be reminded of. Well, I always enjoyed writing. I always loved history. And I think probably the thing that got me excited about Baha'i literature, when I was about 17, I read a book called A Sudden Music by Roger White. And some of you may have read that. It's a little novel that Roger White wrote, and it's set in Paris in the early years of the 20th century. And it's written in the form of letters of a young woman who's visiting Paris at that time, and she encounters Baha'is and she encounters Abdul Baha. And Juliet Thompson figures quite largely in this book. And I was always very passionate about art. And that period in history was just my favorite period. So I think that was the book that sort of got me really excited about literature, Baha'i literature. And then I immediately read The Diary of Juliet Thompson. And then I couldn't get enough of reading biographies. And it was the time in the 80s, really, when a lot of good biographies were coming out about Dorothy Baker and Martha Root and Lewis Gregory and many others. And my first attempt at writing something was I was always also very passionate about the story of Thomas Breakwell, the first English, well, Sheikh Effendi refers to him as the first English believer. And I actually wrote I imagined Thomas Breakwell writing a series of letters to his brother. And I wrote a kind of life of Thomas Breakwell, but in the first person as Thomas Breakwell. And I submitted it to George Ronald Publisher, and they said the Baha'i world isn't ready for this yet. People will think it really is Thomas Breakwell's letters to his brother. So it didn't get published. But then Wendy Moman, who's one of the long-term editors at George Ronald, said to me, a lot of the books that are coming out are biographies of American believers, but we'd like to do some books about women, especially British Baha'i women, because the Baha'i community of the British Isles was built on women. And it was Wendy actually who said to me, would you like to write about Ethel Rosenberg? And I didn't know anything about Ethel Rosenberg. These are pre-internet days, of course, so I would go to public libraries and look up the name Rosenberg because I knew her family were artists, and I would look up in various books about the Rosenberg family of Bath and gradually over a period of about 3 or 4 years, this is 1990 to 94, I pulled together this biography of Ethel Rosenberg, which George Ronald published in 1995. And I think really what happens, as anyone who does research knows, is characters pop up. When you're researching one person, other characters pop up. And then, of course, Lady Blomfield is very well known as a pioneering British believer and, of course, the author of The Chosen Highway. And so it was always in my mind, even while I was writing Ethel Rosenberg, that Lady Blomfield deserved some treatment. And I began to just collect everything could find about Lady Blomfield. And we're very lucky here in London. We have the National Baha'i Archive. We have a lot of Lady Blomfield's papers and various documents, diaries, her visitors book, which is one of the most interesting things because she held these at-home meetings and she had quite a lot of famous names and sort of prominent people coming to her at-home meetings. And we've got her visitors' books here and the business cards of the various people that came. So yeah, over a period of about 12 years, when I had the chance, I was gathering materials. And sometimes I could go for a whole year. I might take a week off work and have a whole week just working on the book, and then I wouldn't do anything on it for another year because of other activities and work. And then I was called to serve at the World Centre in 2009, and the centenary of Abdu'l Baha's visit to London was coming up in 2011. And Wendy Moman got on the phone to me again and said, we'd really like Lady Blomfield in time for Abdu'l Baha's centenary, the centenary of his visit. And so I made a kind of promise to myself that I would spend all my weekends in Haifa. In that first year I was there, actually, I was there for 4 years altogether. But in that first year, I would write every weekend. And actually, the writing didn't take that long in the end because I'd gathered all the information. I'd gathered it in sort of chronological order. I could take out a whole chapter's worth of materials and write. So I was able to finish the book in I think about 2011, and then it finally came out the following year. So it's not something that I do full time professionally. So I'm sure it could have been done much quicker if I'd dedicated, myself entirely to it. And as any Baha'i who's doing this kind of research and work knows, these things take a long time.
Fantastic. I mean, that's very interesting. And it sounds like the actual focus on Lady Bloomfield didn't last for very long. It was actually just 2 or 3 years from the decision to write the book to getting it done. And that's actually, I think, pretty quick, considering the quantity of material you had
Yeah.
and the quantity of material you were able to write up. I gather that of course, you had access to her papers and presumably newspaper articles and other people's memoirs. I don't know, what were your main sources for writing the book?
Well, I asked the research department at the World Centre if I could have any access or copies of any letters that Abdu'l Baha and Shoghi Effendi wrote to Lady Blomfield. So that was a major source. I had her correspondence and diaries and notebooks and so forth, which are here in the UK National Baha'i Archive. And then there were periods. There were periods of her life where there were big chunks missing, where I didn't really know how to find out. And there was also because she had 3 children, but none of them had children of their own, and only one of her daughters, Mary, who went on to serve on the National Assembly here and became a very active Baha'i in her own right. She wrote a little memoir. It's about 25 pages, but it's a typewritten memoir, which was kind of the basis of my chronology, if you like, or my plotting of the book. But I wondered if there was just anybody who could possibly remember her. So I spoke to David Hoffman, who was still alive at the time, about Lady Blomfield, and 1 or 2 very elderly British believers who remembered her, but didn't remember too much about her. David Hoffman remembered the most. But I actually, at one point, I thought, well, her sister went to live in New York, and her sister had a daughter, may have had family, so there may be family still alive from her sister's line. And I actually found a family history researcher in New York who I paid. She was a former policewoman, and she actually went through all like the public records and so forth, found out a lot about the sister, and the sister did indeed have a daughter, but unfortunately she had passed away in about 1970, I think, and didn't have any children of her own. So it sort of came to nothing. So quite a lot of money was spent on trying to sort of trace some family members. And it amounted to about 3 or 4 sentences in the book. And then Lady Blomfield's father-in-law was the Bishop of London. You remember from reading Charles Blomfield. And I saw that a biography was coming out of Charles Blomfield. And through the publisher, I found out that they were having a book launch for this biography of Charles Blomfield. And I was invited. I went and I met quite a lot of Blomfields. And of
Ah,
course, they didn't know. Well, it was actually very interesting because one of them, who's one of the Blomfields, invited me back to his house with some of the other family members, and they had a huge family tree of all the Blomfields, and I found Our Lady Blomfield on the family tree, but none of them really knew much about her.
mhm.
But at that gathering, I met a chap who was, I think his name was Blomfield Smith, and former English army captain or major. And I said to him, "Oh, I'm researching Lady Blomfield," and he said, "Oh, she's the one who's held in great reverence by the Baha'is, isn't she?" So, so I said, "Yes, that's right." And then he said, "You know, during the war, I used to take tea at Masrai with Captain McNeill and his wife."
Ah,
So that was an extraordinary kind of little connection that came out of that. But to be honest, none of them really knew much about her because, as you know from the book, Sir Arthur Blomfield was a widower. He married Lady Blomfield. She was 30 years younger than him, by which time his own children from his first marriage had grown up, and all of these Blomfields were from that line of the family. So yeah, it's just putting things together, bits and pieces. But one of the nice things is when you have a letter and then maybe 2 or 3 years later you get a package of stuff from the World Centre or you find something in the archives and it's kind of the answer to the letter and you can sort of piece together the narrative, but from documents which, are in completely different parts of the world. So.
good. Thanks. Gisu, back to you.
Wow, that's also fascinating. There's so many parts of Lady Blomfield's life that are just so incredibly interesting. Her relationship with Abdul Baha, her very close and special relationship with the beloved guardian Shirvi Effendi, her charitable endeavors. And I was just wondering, in your view, what are some of the highlights of her life? If you were to write a paragraph or a short summary about the highlights, what would they be?
Well, I think what she demonstrates, which is so interesting, is in the 9 year plan now, the House of Justice says there are three major areas of focus of the 9 year plan. The first is expansion consolidation, the second is social action, and the third is participation in the discourses of society. And we should give equal weight to these three areas, and they're all coherent with each other. And of course, we see that in the life of Abdu'l Baha. He was someone who embodied all of those areas of activity. He was committed to social action. He served the people of Akka. He, looked after the sick. He got involved with social causes. But he also participated in discourses. So on his travels and his talks, he was commenting on the race issue in the United States or issues to do with poverty or whatever, or the war, the coming First World War and so forth. And also then spreading the faith, teaching the faith. So Abdu'l Baha, of course, is the example. But I think the thing that interested me most about Lady Blomfield was that she too sort of kind of embodied these three areas of activity. Her recognition of the faith was almost instant. She was clearly a very spiritually receptive and attuned person. So when she heard about the faith in Paris, she says, this is what I've been looking for. And almost immediately she began to promote the faith and tell people about it and visit people and teach, as we would call it. But at the same time, she was so involved in these social causes, the cause of the suffragettes, the cause of peace after the First World War, the League of Nations, and setting up these various groups, her involvement with the Save the Children Fund. And then she set up this movement for the World Supreme Peace, where she would invite speakers to Geneva from all sorts of different backgrounds to kind of contribute to this discourse on peace and world order and so forth. So she just seemed to sort of managed to straddle all of these worlds. And of course, because of her position in society through her husband being the son of the Bishop of London and her connections with the royal family and so on, the people that she mixed with and she was familiar with were people of influence. And so she was able to present the faith to people of prominence and thinkers of the day. And I think that makes her a really interesting example of someone. I mean, we don't all have the kind of prominent social contacts that she had, but, we can see that in her mind, being a Baha'i was about the recognition of Baha'u'llah, the love of Abdul Baha, but it was about active service to humanity and also influencing thought in conversations.
I love that she was fearless in using those contacts for the benefit of the faith also. I think that was a great lesson for me when I was reading that. We have a few questions for you before I ask you to read your favorite story for us. Mary Kay McCoskey has a question.
Oh, hi. I'm Mary Kay. And I love Lady Blomfield. I love her. I just love her. And I wanted to ask so many questions, but I wanted to know if we have a recording of her voice.
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Another question I had was, what did you learn about Lady Blomfield that surprised you?
Well, I think there's this great mystery around her origins, and I think that was, at some point I just had to draw a line under it because I just couldn't find out much about, I knew from her daughter's memoir that she'd grown up in Ireland, and she had a sister, that there was this atmosphere of religious prejudice between her father and mother, Catholic Protestant. Mary Blomfield in her memoir says that her grandmother had brought Sarah and Eleanor, the sisters, to live in England because of this atmosphere of religious prejudice. But yeah, then this mystery about her address on the wedding certificate, which sort of places her in kind of poor people's accommodation, the kind of social housing where sort of maids and servants and artist models and those kinds of people lived. And that sort of intrigued me, and just trying to work out, well, how did Sir Arthur Blomfield even meet her or come across her? And we know he was a widower, perhaps, and I sort of began to speculate maybe she was a governess. He had a young daughter. Maybe she was working in his household. Maybe she was an artist model. I really didn't know, and that's when I sort of tried to get this detective in New York to sort of track down any other leads. And then I asked David Hoffman about it, and he said, "Oh no, she was every inch nobility." He said, "As I remember her, she was every inch nobility." And so, and she wasn't very tall, so,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I think that was what kind of surprised me, is that she seemed, and yeah, she seemed not to want people to sort of know about her background. But then you just have to draw a line and say, well, if she didn't want people to know, then who am I to kind of dig it up? I didn't feel like I could go any further in working it out. And what's really interesting and at the same time a little bit frustrating for me is there's so much more now available. So now when you've got websites like ancestry.com and sort of websites where people can search public records and so on. Mujan Momen recently wrote this history of the British Baha'i community, which George Ronald had published. And he's got more about her background than I could find at the time. So what's also interesting now is that whereas Mary, her daughter, had said that her grandmother had brought her mother and her sister to England, we can now locate the whole family in Wales, in Cardiff, including the father and a brother who I didn't even know about. And they appear in a census, I think the 1861 or 1871 census. And then the brother is put down as a trainee auctioneer, and it seems that the brother and the father went back to Ireland, and then we can locate Lady Blomfield and her sister and her mother in Reading, just outside London. So there's a bit more information now, which wasn't available to me at the time because of, more and more public records going online. So yes, I don't know. It doesn't really help us understand how she met Sir Arthur Blomfield, but I think she, Mary says that, when she put the daughters to bed, she looked like a queen, and she had all these jewels, and she was very elegant, and so on. So yeah, I think it's just that sort of mysterious transformation. Um, but I don't know if we'll ever know. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to thank you for all the little bits in the book that, especially that bit about W.I. Stead, of his prescience about getting on the Titanic. And I thought, this is a perfect Twilight Zone episode. Perfect. And I imagine W.I. Stead stepping into the next world and waiting there for Rod Serling to step in. And Rod says, I missed a great episode.
Yeah,
It
he
would
predicted
be
it.
perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, sorry to take up the time,
No,
but
no
I
worries.
loved all the little bits. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Mary Kay. We have a question from Debbie, and then we'll get to a lot of I see a lot of hands up. We'll get to those questions when we open it up, but not just yet. Debbie, you had a question for Rob?
Yeah, so my question was sort of kind of answered with your last answer because I was wondering about educational background and how she became, had the ability for writing and everything that she did.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, she seemed to be very well read because after Sir Arthur Blomfield died, she went to live in Broadway, in Worcestershire, and she sort of immersed herself in the life of the mind, we might say, and she read a lot about theosophy and mysticism and Buddhism and so on. So she clearly had this, great capacity for contemplating spiritual truth, and a kind of poetic sensibility, which is possibly an Irish thing. She had this connection with her roots and the sort of mysticism of her roots, and clearly there are scraps of paper in the archives of bits of poetry, and which I've put some of them in the book. It's not clear whether she wrote them herself or not, or whether they were just things that she liked. But someone said she was very fond of quoting her favorite thinkers and mystics and so on. So yeah, she and the daughters were both passionate about theatre and acting.
Right.
So yeah, she seemed to be someone that was very literate and had a love of words. And love of storytelling and recording history as well, because so much of Abdul Baha's passed away. She's in Haifa and she's spending the time sitting with the Holy Family, writing down their memory,
Right.
and collecting those stories.
Yeah. No, I really found it fascinating and very um enlivening. She was connecting it to the plan and everything. But I just thought it was amazing how much you were able to document about all the million things she did. I thought Dorothy Baker was busy, but Blomberg, I'm almost thinking is taking the cake because she did so, so much. So it was fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. I love that she recognized the importance of the time that she lived in and was taking the time to document the history of the Holy Family and write down the Paris talks and just really, work with the Guardian on translations. And I just really feel like she understood what she was doing and how important this particular time was that she was living in. Rob, do you have a particular story that you like or a passage you'd like to read for us? we love to have our authors read something or tell us a story.
Oh gosh. Well, I noted down three. I mean, you've all read the book recently, so you'll remember. I loved the account, her own account of the trip to Lebanon, where she went in the Buick across the desert with the Dreyfus Barneys, and the car broke down, and all of those. So that's one of my favorite parts. And I also like the story where she's called to sit with the Greatest Holy Leaf and await Queen Marie of Romania on that sort of thwarted pilgrimage. And then how 4 years later, she finally manages to catch up with Queen Marie in London and present her with the calligraphy that Shoghi Effendi had given her 4 years earlier. So those were sort of two episodes I like, and the story of the Mary and the suffragettes, sort of being presented to the king and bowing down and saying, "Stop the force feeding of suffragettes," and Mrs. Pankhurst saying Lady Blomfield advocated all sorts of action on the part of women's rights as long as it was done by other people's daughters. But I liked the trip to Jerusalem, actually, where she goes to the tomb of King David, and I don't know if you remember that episode. I'll read it to you because I think it shows something also of her courage. In the first week of February, as the mourning activities, the morning of Abdul Baha's passing, in the first week of February, as the mourning activities became less intense, Lady Blomfield was free to make an excursion, spending 9 days in Jerusalem, visiting the holy sites of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. She relished walking through the city's streets, which had witnessed centuries of religious history. She enthused about her visit to Mary. "It all seems a glorious dream. I must remember things to tell you which I cannot write. A wedding at which I found myself an unexpected guest. The Mosque of Omar, the tomb of David will figure in the story. Also, the high priest of the Samaritans. Surely never was a 9 days so full." On one of the days in Jerusalem, Setare, escorted by one of the Eastern believers, stopped near the entrance to the tomb of King David that was being guarded by a doorkeeper wearing a turban. As Lady Blomfield approached, the doorkeeper gestured for her to step back, speaking rapidly in Arabic. "What is he saying?" Setare asked her companion. "He says you're not permitted to enter." "Why should I not?" retorted Lady Blomfield. "No Christians can go in." "Are only Jews privileged to do so?" "Neither Jews nor Christians may enter this holy place of Islam." The guardian of the tomb began to speak more volubly than before. When she asked her translator what he was saying, he replied, "He says that lady must not come near, for she despises Muhammad, the Prophet of Allah." Firmly, Setare responded, "Now please say to this guardian that he is not a good man, for he is talking a falsehood." "Oh, lady, I cannot say that to him." "Yes, you must, please. I will make it right afterwards." The doorkeeper looked amazed at Lady Blomfield's bold statement. Setare said to her companion, "Now say to him, the lady reverences Moses, she loves and reverences Jesus Christ. She believes that Muhammad is the Prophet of Allah, and so reverences him as you reverence Christ." The translation complete, the guardian of the tomb held out both his hands and said, "Then we are friends." The gatekeeper opened the door to let Lady Blomfield into the tomb. However, there was a problem. Lady Blomfield would have difficulty proceeding if she removed her shoes and high garters. "Wait, wait," said the doorman, who hurried off, returning with 2 cloths, one pink and the other grey, which he began wrapping around her feet. Thus equipped, 1 foot pink and 1 foot grey, he led her into the tower and left her to pray at the tomb of King David. "Hewn in the rock, made smooth by the centuries of devoted pilgrims who had knelt there," wrote Setare later. "No other ornamentation to mar its dignity. I felt an overwhelming sense of the sanctity of that holy place, and how easy it was to make friends with Islam who shared our reverences, and to them religion was so great a reality. When I emerged, I found my friend and the doorkeeper in evident disagreement, the Muslims saying, 'No, I do not wish to accept coins for showing the lady into the Tower of David, for she revered Muhammad, the Prophet of Allah, and so is our friend.'" More importantly than sightseeing, though, was the opportunity Lady Blomfield had to appeal to the British authorities in Jerusalem to secure protection for the shrine of Baha'u'llah. Shortly after the master's passing, his scheming half-brother Mirza Muhammad Ali had called upon the civil authorities to give him the custodianship of Baha'u'llah's shrine, claiming that he was Abdu'l-Baha's lawful successor. The British refused on the grounds that it appeared to be a religious issue. On Tuesday, the 30th of January, Muhammad Ali's younger brother Badiullah, with some of his supporters, visited the shrine and forcibly seized the keys from the Baha'i caretaker, Abul Qasim Khorasani, and demanded that Muhammad Ali be recognized by the authority as the shrine's legal custodian. The governor of Akka then ordered the keys to be given to the authorities and posted guards at the shrine, refusing to hand the keys to either party. Lady Blomfield's intervention seems to have gone some way towards easing the restrictions, and although the keys to the inner tomb were still held by the authorities, access to the other rooms of the shrine was now granted to the Baha'is, and unfortunately to the covenant breakers also. I think that sort of demonstrates something of her boldness and her courage in both instances, talking her way into the tomb of David, but also appealing to the authorities to get the keys for the shrine of Baha'u'llah.
Absolutely. Incredible stories. Thank you so much. Rob, last question from me is, having worked on this book, what of her actions inspires your own service? I know you serve in so many capacities, but what is it that you learned from her service that inspires your own?
Gosh. Well, I think like I was saying before, she sort of embodies these areas of activity, being, a teacher, someone who engages in serving humanity, social action, and discourses. And I think her absolute conviction was what made her kind of so compelling. So this fearlessness, I'm not saying I follow anywhere near her footsteps, but just this ability to talk to anyone and to really be quite bold in her proclamation of the teachings to people, no matter what their social status, is something that we do a lot of external affairs work. This ability to see that doesn't matter what someone's position is in society, they're still a soul and they still have the capacity to respond and to appeal to their higher nature. And she did that with all the people she met. You remember the story where she actually even writes to the king, and she's preparing Abdu'l-Baha to meet the king, and then Abdu'l-Baha says, "No, I didn't come here to meet the king. I came here to meet the poor." And he teaches her a lot of lessons as well. And I think she also, I mean, Shoghi Effendi talks about race being the number one issue, the most pressing issue in the United States, and Britain is about class, without a doubt. Perhaps race isn't the most pressing issue in Britain, but still, even today, class is still an issue. Wealth, the sort of the barriers between those who have and those who have not, and the educated and the not so well educated, and so on. And she was able to sort of, I think, perhaps because she came from this mysteriously perhaps working class or middle class background and then moved into that circle, even though she was sort of perfectly capable of operating in those worlds, her heart was also with humanity. She seemed to have great empathy and sympathy, and she hid suffragettes in her cottage from the police and so forth. So yeah, she was just courageous, and she was able in her own life to overcome any kind of class or social prejudice.
Fantastic. I'm going to turn it over to Robert. Robert, as you see, we have many people with their hands raised. I don't know if you can see them.
I can, yeah.
Good. So let me turn it over to you. Yep.
We've got 4 people, and I'll raise my hand as well, so I'll be number 5. Shahla, what's your question?
Yes, thank you so much for the book. I knew her as a child as Sitare Khanum. a lot of Persian believers called her by her Persian name. I wonder if she ever used it. That was one question. The other question I have is she was buried in Hampstead. Do Baha'is in Britain still go to visit her grave?
Yeah.
I remember one year going on, I don't know if it was her birthday or the day she passed away or on a holy day as a group of youth in the 60s. So I'm wondering if still people visit that. The last question is, how much was she involved with other well-known women, British women, when Abdul Baha's life was in danger in Palestine? And there were a number of women, British, upper class Baha'i women who were writing, um, trying to get help from the British government. Well, how much she was involved and if there are any documents on that.
Yes. The first question, yes, she used the name Setare. In fact, Abdu'l Baha gave Persian names to all the family. He called Mary Parveen. He called Rose, Eleanor, Nuri. I'm not sure what the name he gave to Lady Blomfield's son. I haven't found that anywhere. But they did use those names. And sometimes she anglicized Setare to Esther, which is the English version of star. Setare means star and Esther. So sometimes she signs her letters Esther Blomfield. And certainly Mary used the name Parveen. And this building I'm sitting in now, which is the National Baha'i Centre in London at 27 Rutland Gate, this building was bought with the proceeds from Lady Blomfield's home. And because of that, Parveen, when she passed away, the money came and we were able to buy this building with her money. So the main
Yes, I was married there.
So the main drawing room is called the Parveen Room, and that was named in honor of her daughter. Her grave fell into disrepair because there are no surviving family members. But then about 20 years ago, the National Assembly put a new monument up. So when you go, you can see pictures of it in the book. But when you go to the Hampstead Cemetery, the grave has a new stone. And I believe the local Baha'is in Hampstead and that part of North London do go and visit it from time to time. And then in terms of her involvement with defending or protecting Abdu'l Baha's life, she was very involved because the word came from Tudor Pole in the Holy Land that Abdu'l Baha's life was in danger. And she wrote to a number of her contacts. We know that Mrs. White in Edinburgh, who was the Abdu'l Baha's host in Edinburgh, her son was a member of Parliament, and also Lady Elcho and some of these other people that she knew. She wrote to them to try and ensure that Abdu'l Baha was protected. So, yes, she drew upon her contacts to defend the faith as well.
Thank you.
Christine.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Rob, for being here this morning. It's been really super. My question as I was rereading the book this past week was that in the early 1900s, I noticed that descriptions of people sharing the message were often, they seemed like the people were a little bit afraid or circumspect or reticent to tell people about it. And I wondered if you had found that in your research as well. I felt like it was sort of, there was like a secret. And I was just wondering, was that just because they thought it might be dangerous, or that they were just wanting to be sure that the person was open spiritually to this really precious message?
Yeah, I think the way that the faith was initially taught in the United States through Hayrullah's method, there was this course of 19 lessons.
Yeah.
And then on the 19th lesson, he gave them the greatest name. It was like it all built up to this final lesson where he gave them the greatest name. And I think so. So many of the people that had been taught, like Louis Getzinger and very early believers, that was the
Isabella
method they,
Brittingham.
yeah, that was the method they followed. I don't think it was so much the case in Lady Blomfield's case because you remember the story when Bertha Herbert encounters her in Paris and just says, "If you think I look happy, it's because I am happy.
Yes.
Do you want to know why?" She was very direct, and I get the feeling that she was very she wasn't so. I think having the advantage of having Abdul Baha in London was, she was very keen that people came to see Abdul Baha and experience what it was like to be with him. So I think it would seem to me that like a lot of the people that she met were seekers in a sense that, she was involved with theosophists and spiritualists and these different kinds of people. So she didn't seem to have any hesitation in introducing these people to Abdul Baha. I think maybe later on it sort of transforms a little bit because when she's in Geneva, she's talking more about issues. She creates these, meetings to talk about peace or justice or save the children or things like that. So it perhaps the emphasis more went towards social causes, but she would always put quotes from Baha'u'llah in her pamphlets about these causes. She would always have a quote from Abdul Baha or
Right.
Baha'u'llah. So, yeah.
Right.
I think you get the impression that they were kind of I've recently been going through all of Dr. Esselmont's letters, and it's so interesting because you're so yearning for people to respond, and he says, why aren't people, this was during the First World War. He said, why aren't people more interested? Why aren't people responding?
Exactly. Even the letters that I have of my great aunt, all through the 60 years of her letters that I have access to, she was constantly sad about the materialism around her and the closed-mindedness, even throughout 2 world wars, where you would think people would be interested in learning something hopeful. But then also my great-great-grandmother, her letters from like 1907, 1908. Also, nobody wants to hear, or they're interested for a minute, she says. It's something new, but then they just, it's put to the wayside because they just go on with other things. She says it doesn't stick. And I thought that's incredible because we feel in our era that it's just us having problems because of materialism, but it's not. It's been like that forever so far.
Which is why these people are so outstanding that they responded as they did and
kept persevering.
kept persevering and gave up everything to be able to promote it,
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Good. Thanks. Jan Yassin, what do you have? You're muted.
Hello. Oh, Rob, good to see you. Oh, you're looking wonderful. Question, which has been nagging me for a decade or so. Morning spent with Abdul Baha Abbas, which is a proto Paris Talks. Did you come up with any background to that? There's about 4 or 5 copies floating around in the Baha'i world. And the National Library of Scotland has 1 copy. So there's 1 in the public domain.
No, I'm aware of that, and also it became an article in the was it Star of the West or one of the early Baha'i World volumes? It was reprinted or highlights from it were reprinted in one.
I don't remember. I know that there was a French non-Baha'i scholar who wrote on Abdul Baha and use that text greatly instead of Paris Talks. So I was just wondering if you came across anything, or you have any theories about when it was written, or
No, I suspect. I mean, the Blomfield's version of events is that they made the notes of Paris Talks and then went off to Switzerland and compiled the book. And I mean, a lot of Lady Blomfield, even The Chosen Highway, it sort of appears in in different forms before the final book came out. You know, there were articles. There was an article in the Baha'i World volume, and she used to read from her notes in meetings, and you know, there was quite a kind of culture of producing leaflets and pamphlets. When Esselmont wrote Baha'u'llah and the New Era, one of the chapters was published as a pamphlet, What is a Baha'i, long before the book actually came out. So I wonder if it was just a you know, sort of preliminary version. But I know also that Laura Barney disputed the Blomfield's version of Paris Talks.
Yes, we had a conversation about that, didn't we? Yes. My theory is that when Lady Blomfield went to Germany, her daughters put this morning's thing together. And because there's some text from Mary Hanford Ford as well in there. Her recollections. Anyway, I was just wondering if you had any anything in your background about that.
No, I'm sorry. You'll have to keep worrying about it.
Okay. Okay. The other thing, the second point is of the fact that there's no information on this is very telling about Lady Blomfield's status. There was no gossip. I could find no indication of gossip. Therefore, she would not have been working class.
Yeah, that's interesting because yes, if she had been, then there would have been some scurrilous gossip in the press.
Yes, that's
you know,
right.
Why is Sir Arthur Blomfield marrying?
And his brother, brother was even of a higher status, and there's no. So I think no information is information. Thank you again for that wonderful book.
Jennifer, please.
Yes. Thank you, Rob, for the book. It is wonderful. I wanted to say that you show the interaction between Abdu'l-Baha and Lady Blomfield in a way, just it seems like this back and forth conversation, and it really gives me a sense of the people and just you know, their feelings, and you know, just makes it come to life. And you know, I really appreciated it, and I would think it would be hard because there's so many accounts of Abdu'l-Baha, but it seems like that you were able to find some stories and elaborate on them in ways that hadn't been done before. And so, you know, I really appreciate the book. I wanted to ask you a couple of things about you from the beginning. It talked about your podcast series that may be Baha'i related. Can you tell me what the name of that is?
Yeah, I mean, we recently started a series of podcasts for George Ronald, publisher.
Okay.
And if you go to the George Ronald website, there's a heading which says podcasts. And the idea behind that was to really help the books become better known. So I think we've done 7 or 8 so far, and they are interviews with the authors, including Jennifer Wiebers, who's here, about her book, about the Knoblochs, Alma Knobloch, and so then there's more in the pipeline, just in the process of setting up 3 or 4 more interviews. So
wonderful.
That's the George Ronald podcast. I also made a series in the year of Abdu'l-Baha's centenary, the centenary of Abdu'l-Baha's passing. We did a series called Ambassador to Humanity, which you can also find.
I've heard several of those. I like those. Yeah.
By Rainn Wilson.
Yeah, excellent. And then the novel that you said at the beginning excited you initially about the Baha'i faith. Can you tell me the name and the author of that again?
Yes, that was A Sudden Music by Roger White.
Oh, okay. Wonder if that's still available.
I think, George Ronald published that. And actually, when I was 18, I went to serve in Haifa for the gardens as a youth. And the very first Saturday night I was there, I was invited to someone's house and I met Roger White. And I was so excited to meet him because I said, I loved your book. And that was the book that really turned me on to Baha'i history and wanted to know about Abdu'l-Baha. And he was very touched, I think, that it had at least touch one person.
Oh yeah, sudden music. Okay. And the other thing that I was surprised to learn from the book, and I wondered if you could elaborate that when Abdu'l-Baha spoke, that my understanding is that he would give his speech in its entirety in his native language, and then somebody there who was scribbling notes would repeat it, in English, or that somebody who already had the notes would read it in English. And I always thought there was kind of a back and forth, but that's more how it's done in the present day. But could you talk a little bit about just how, like, what the interpreters would do, in a speech, or even at an informal gathering, such as at Lady Blomfield's house? And I saw that Abdu'l-Baha learned some English, and he was speaking, talking about, little things with the words that he had used, but just how the interpretation was done. I find that fascinating. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think Rob Stockman might be able to help with that answer as well, because I think in some cases, I think the sort of the day-to-day meetings with friends, there would be an interpreter present.
Yeah.
Most Ahmad Sohrab or one of the other translators, because there's a story, I think it's Tudor Pole, where he says the interpreter leaves the room and Abdu'l-Baha continues talking, and he says, I understood him perfectly, even though I didn't speak a word of Persian and he didn't speak a word of English. We understood each other perfectly. So, and then there's another story in the United States where Abdu'l-Baha speaking in a large gathering, and one lady in the audience turns to the lady next to her and says, "Why does that man keep interrupting Abdu'l-Baha?"
Yeah.
And she says, "Well, he's translating." And she says, "But anyone could understand what he's saying, And so there are examples clearly of times when there's an interpreter present. But I think, for example, when Abdu'l-Baha speaks, the two big talks he gives in London in 1911 at St. John's, Westminster, and at the City Temple, it says in the accounts that he gave his talk and then it was read, the translation was read by Tudor Pole or whoever it was. So it seems like some of those big kind of keynote talks were probably written in advance.
Yeah.
I don't know if Rob has any other insights into that.
Yeah, I don't remember in the United States of him ever having written any of them in advance, but perhaps he did in some cases. But definitely it was sentence by sentence translation. Usually, there's the story in one case where the translator, in fact, had made a mistake, and Abdu'l-Baha corrected him. Abdu'l-Baha had said Zemestan, and the translator had translated it summer, and Abdu'l-Baha says, no, winter. So Abdu'l-Baha was aware of the translation and was correcting it occasionally.
Very good. Well, thank you. That's so interesting. And just thank you for the book. And I'm like halfway through it, but I went and I read the afterword, and I read some of the talks at the end. But I'm excited to finish it probably in the next couple of days. But it's wonderful, and thank you again.
Thank you.
I have two questions for you. One has to do with 90 Cadogan Gardens and whatever happened to the house. I gather what you said, that the proceeds went to buy Rutland Gate, which is quite exciting. And you also, I think, hinted that it was worth tens of millions of pounds now. I assume that we would like to eventually have it, considering Abdu'l-Baha stayed there and all that. So that's my first question. My second question is, it's very interesting that Lady Blomfield was so involved in recording Paris talks, which of course is his 1911 talks, and then Abdu'l-Baha in London, which again are his 1911 talks. But I gather his 1913 talks in Britain have never been organized and published, or perhaps they have, I don't know, and I'm not aware of. And similarly, his talks in Paris in 1913. What's happened with all of those talks? Jan would probably know about the latter, of course.
Yeah, 97 Cadogan Gardens is like an apartment block, a sort of Victorian apartment block, and Lady Blomfield lived at flat 10 within 97 Cadogan Gardens. It's not far from here. It's just about a 20-minute walk from where I am. Yeah, we don't. She sold it. and moved to Hampstead with her daughter Mary and her husband. And it's never been in Baha'i hands, that apartment. And yes, it's a very, very expensive. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the price would be, but I think flats around that part of London, they go for like 4 or 5 million pounds now. So I think at some point the flats and the street was renumbered. So first of all, we need to be sure that that
Getting the right one.
if it ever came onto market, is actually the correct one. Um, no, I mean, as far as I remember, it did come up, or at least what we thought it was, did come up on the market about 15, 20 years ago, but it was only a 19-year lease on it, or 9-year lease or something. It was well over £2 million then, and it was a very short lease because London, most of the property is leasehold, i.e., everything's owned by the Duke of Westminster, and you just buy the lease for 99 years or whatever. So no, it's not in our hands. Although recently you probably saw that we were able to acquire the apartment in Bristol where Abdul Baha spoke, and that's been restored beautifully, and people can go and visit that now. That was Tudor Pole's guest house at the time. And in terms of the 1913 talks, yeah, there's no notebooks that I'm aware of for London. I mean, there's the recently published second volume of Mahmud's diary,
Yeah.
and also the Mirza Ahmad Sohrab's diary, which gives a day-to-day account of where he went in the second visit and the talks he gave. And Jan himself has done the book Abdul Baha in France, which gives a sort of day-to-day account of where he went and what he spoke about in different places. And he's tried to match it up with various published talks that have appeared in different sources. Yeah, it's curious that she didn't do a sort of second tranche. But I think certainly in France, the second visit was quite different from the first. He was meeting a lot of diplomats, and he was sort of having these talks with ambassadors, Turkish ambassadors, and various things. They weren't so much about public talks, and they were more kind of, it was this sort of private peace mission in a way.
It's interesting. Thank you. Karen, go ahead with your question. You're still muted. There you go.
Yeah. I just wanted to thank you also so much for bringing the attention of Abdul Baha's attitude towards Lady Blomfield's humanitarian and political activities, because that really permeated the book. And it was as if Abdul Baha, she would want to fundraise for the Save the Children, and she would want to involve the Baha'i community in this. And it seemed that he was always sort of bringing her back to the fact that only the Baha'is can teach the faith, and that only the faith is going to have any sort of permanent influence in the world. And there was one quotation from Abdul Baha, which you included, which is so pertinent nowadays. We talk about the relevance of the book club to present day activities. And if I can just read it, it's short, but where Abdul Baha says, political measures can have great influence, but only on condition that they be associated with the power of the Word of God and assisted by the aid of the Holy Spirit. For otherwise, the foundations of this mighty edifice, and I think he was referring to the League of Nations, cannot stand secure, but will be shaken every day for a different reason. And, it's a good reminder for all of us, where our focus really needs to be. And when we're talking to people and, to really try and put the spirit of the faith and the meaning of the faith across in a way that will help to create a more stable foundation for the future.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Louis was just asking which book we're talking about I think the one that Jan put together. Jan, what's the title of your book? You're still there.
Yeah, it's called Abdu'l-Baha in France, 1911 and 1913. And if I could just make a comment, the situation in France is reversed from England in that in England, the 1911 period is well documented. We know Abdu'l-Baha's talks and all that and his movements. And in France, it's the other way around. It's 1913, which is well documented, and 1911 is in the shadows. We don't we have Paris talks, but that's fragments of his talks. It's really it's more akin to Pilgrim's Notes than anything else. And his activities and we don't know. We don't know many of the activities or many of the talks that he gave in Paris in 1911. It's a real mystery. And in 1913, what is really missing from the whole picture, and which will always be missing, is his Turkish talks. His talks with the Turkish and Kurdish, because Abdu'l-Baha spoke Kurdish. So his talks with the Ottoman, Egyptian, and Persian diplomats, we don't know what he did. As Rob succinctly said, this was Abdu'l-Baha's private peace mission. And we can conjecture that there was some success to that in the fact that Egypt never went to war. So, how much influence Abdu'l-Baha had on that, I don't know, but it's conjecture. So that's the basis of that. And a second edition of Abdu'l-Baha in France is being planned for next year, I hope, and it'll be available through Amazon, the second edition. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, that's good to know. And we have a question from Chris Abbas. You're still there. You go.
Hi, Rob.
Hey.
It seems very clear that when people read these books about some of our beloved Baha'is, that we're very we're thrilled, we're encouraged, we're inspired. I like to write some of them down as monologues. I have a feeling that. Do you feel that we need to do more to actually put it out into the whole art world, not just books, because many people actually don't enjoy reading as such, but actually the theatre, drama would be a way. How can we make that more?
Yeah, we've seen some wonderful ones. I mean, you've done quite a few yourself. And I always think Anne Bowles wrote a really wonderful one about Martha Root, which has been published as a monologue. Yeah, I mean, I think it just requires people who have a bit of a talent for acting, and it does. They don't always have to be monologues. They could be, 2 or 3 people in conversation, or episodes that are kind of brought to life in drama and plays. So yeah, I definitely think that would be very helpful, and it just requires people who are keen on that sort of thing to sort of to do that. Sometimes I wonder, I've just started in the last couple of years really seriously researching Dr. Esselmont's life, and I thought, and I've been thinking to myself, do I really want to spend the next 12 years researching this and writing another book? Would it not be better as a documentary film or some sort of, dramatic thing? But whatever you do, you still have to do the research, So even if it eventually comes out as a video or some other kind of visual form or performed form. The research still has to be done. So hopefully, I mean, I often think that the books that we do and that we bring out, this book's been out 12 years and it's just selling out now. The first print run, which I think was 1,000 copies, is only just selling out after 12 years. So, only 1,000 people in the world have bought a copy of this. And that kind of makes you a little bit sad as a writer when you think, well, surely more people would be interested but I think a lot of what we do is for the future, and as I said earlier, now there's a bit more information coming available about Lady Blomfield's early life. Maybe there'd be a second edition, but hopefully someone doesn't have to go through that process again. Now it's done. It's there forever, and it's a book that anyone can draw on and use for whatever purpose, sharing stories or acting out episodes, So yeah, just feel free to do it, I think.
And Jennifer has another question, please.
As far as people not maybe wanting to read but would like to hear audiobooks, like the one about Louis Gregory, Shining Circle, that was made into an audiobook, and that's how I listen to it. And I love audiobooks, and like listening to, or see, I'm listening to your book now because I have Alexa, and Alexa is reading the book to me, and Alexa has a beautiful voice, and it's just incredible, But I think if more of these books were put out as audio books, that you would get a greater readership. There's, I mean, not you in particular, but just Baha'is, that there's a free library app, and most of the books that they give out, that they offer for free, are audiobooks, because audiobooks are so popular. So some of these books that get a person or two who likes to read aloud to publish these in this form, and I think the readership would go way up. I love audiobooks because I can do housework and exercise and all that while I'm reading, and it really frees me up to move around. So I'll just say that.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Also sounds like the reason to keep doing podcasts.
Yeah.
Shala.
Yes, Jennifer mentioned about people not reading. Young people don't read at all. And often I find that I like to recommend especially biography about Baha'i women because they move the world. They truly are unbelievable. You can't visualize. Actually, you try to visualize how these women traveled all over the world and did all these things that they achieved in their lifetimes. Ordinary women in some ways, but great women. So what I do is I do recommend the books to young people. They don't read it. And I suggest that I don't let them take it out of my house because I never get it back. But I read little stories from it to my JYs. I find they are not so interested in a story unless it has a kind of the kind of thing that like ninja kind of thing in it. So I try to introduce some kind of ninja feeling into the story to get them interested in it. It's fascinating that this generation, our generation read, and now we listen more, as it was mentioned. But the new generation, do not read. I don't know if anybody else has found a way to kind of get them interested in reading, especially this kind of books, which encourages you to share the faith.
I think one of the things that's happened here in some of the neighborhoods, we have some neighborhoods where young people from different kind of backgrounds, maybe they're Afro-Caribbean or they're Roma, Slavic, Roma people from what was Slovakia. They've become very excited about the Dawnbreakers. And they've come through the junior youth program, they've come through study circles, they're sort of very involved in activities. But the people that are working with them have started introducing some of the stories of the Dawnbreakers. They're kind of ninjas, aren't they? So yeah, they love that. Especially the men. Young men love the Dawnbreakers stories because there's kind of a lot of swords and heroism. So yeah, I think as long as the stories are there, we just have to find ways of sharing them and making them appealing. And yeah, a book can be quite daunting, especially the Dawnbreakers or some of the history. But pulling out stories is, take the story of Zainab from the Dawnbreakers as a young village girl who cuts her hair and fights alongside the men. I mean, it's like Mulan or any of those kind of stories. Those are the kinds of things that attract their attention. But I agree with you about
Now
audio.
that could be made into a play.
Yeah.
If we have enough historical information.
Yes.
Part of the problem is you end up having to invent information, and the House doesn't want a lot of information invented because you can't separate it later on from the truth, historical truth. Jan, you want to, what's your comment?
Okay, two points. One, there's an agency for audiobooks free. It's called LibriVox, and they have several Baha'i books. I know they have the book written by Hippolyte Dreyfus in English available. They might have other books. I don't know. LibriVox, and the story about the heroic women from the period of the Dawnbreakers. This inspired newspaper articles in 1851 across the United States. The title of the newspaper articles was "An Army of Women," and so we have a long history of heroic recounting of the Dawnbreakers, 1851.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are we about out of questions? I'll turn it over back to Gisu here, I think.
Thank you so much. What an incredibly interesting discussion. And Rob, we're going to be reading your book for, as Abdul Baha says, ages and centuries to come, so that we can remember Lady Blomfield. And before we started, you mentioned that your mother had been impatient about this book to come out about Lady Blomfield. And I'm going to be very impatient about the book for Dr. Esselmont to come out. I've often wondered about him and his background, and I'm just so excited that you're working on that book. It's been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you to everyone. I just wanted to remind you about what's coming up next. Next month, we're reading the book Agnes Baldwin Alexander, Hand of the Cause of God. And we're so happy that Earl Redmond will join us on February 23rd at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's our Sunday at 2 time slot. Robert Stockman, can you tell us a little bit about what's happening with the Corinne True Center?
Well, that's a good question. I'd have to do a little struggling to remember what's coming up. Next week, is it next week? Is February 3rd? Maybe that's not quite next week. It's 2 weeks. Maybe that is next week. We're going to hear from Ted Brownstein talking about the concept of the oneness of humanity in the Torah. And that should be quite an interesting webinar, 2 p.m. Sundays. And then 2 weeks after that, I can't remember who we have now for that particular one. I've mentioned it already in previous meeting, actually. And starting on Monday, we have a class on the writings of Baha'u'llah that starts. It's going to be a 16-week class on the writings of Baha'u'llah online with a lot of resources for people to go through the major tablets of Baha'u'llah together. And then we're going to be doing a course starting in May on Buddhism from a Baha'i perspective. And it appears that we're going to have Arabic 3 starting in March, and probably a Persian 2 starting at some point in maybe April. We're still not sure when that one's going to start. So we have some very interesting courses and webinars coming up through the Corinne True Center.
Thank you, Robert. I'm taking the class on the writings of Baha'u'llah, and I've gone through the course material, and it's incredible. I mean, the writings themselves are, of course, amazing, but the resources that you've also been able to put so that we can understand better those writings. So, for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at the course offerings of the Core and True Center, I really strongly recommend them. They're fabulous, and I'm so excited to start on Monday with the class on the writings of Baha'u'llah. Well, thank you, Rob Weinberg. Thank you so much. What an incredible, incredible time we've had with you.
Thank
And
you.
let me give you the last word.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm quite touched and very happy that you've been reading the book and enjoying it. And yeah, just keep passing it on. I mean, even if you don't want to let the book out your house, like Shahla, but encourage other people to read it and share the stories. And yeah, makes it all worthwhile. All the years and years of research to know that people are reading it and enjoying it. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Happy reading, and we'll see you in February. Bye-bye.